schools in the United Arab Emirates. Edward's current research interests include creativity and innovation, maker-centered learning, design thinking, and contemporary approaches to art, teaching, and learning. In addition to his work as an educational research, he is also a lecturer on education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Edward's most recent books include Participatory Creativity, Introducing Access and Equity to the Creative Classroom, and Maker-Centered Learning, Empowering Young People to Shape Their Worlds. Please welcome Dr. Clapp.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. I think we're actually starting early, which is great. So that'll give us some extra time, but we should also understand that people are going to be shuffling through as they come in. So come on in, folks. We're just getting started. So hello. It's wonderful to be with you here today. As Yvonne has said, my name is Edward, and I'm a principal investigator at Project Zero, where I research various different things, but at the heart of what I look at has to do a lot with both creativity and innovation. So it's this creativity concept that I'm going to talk about with you today. But I'd like to enter into thinking about this word by talking about how I think about words. So I like words. I like sticky words. I like gooey words. I like words that are complex or hard to say or hard to understand, or words that don't have any real meaning. And I think creativity is one of these words. So it's a word that I've been studying for some years now, and I've learned a little bit about this word, and I'd like to share what I've learned about this word with you all today. So that's what we're going to do. But enough about words, let's talk about images. So I want to talk about this image for a moment. This image comes from a group in Oakland, California called the Flux Foundation. And it's a large public art installation called Brawley Frog. So we had someone here yesterday who was presenting on a play at Burning Man, and the Flux Foundation comes out of the Burning Man tradition. So the woman who was presenting on Burning Man yesterday talked about this concept at Burning Man that they call radical inclusion. And something the Flux Foundation talks about is a concept that they call radical collaboration. So this whole idea that in order to make a giant, large-scale piece of art, you can't just use, it goes beyond the capacities of just single individuals. So creativity from their perspective is an act of radical collaboration and includes the incorporation of many different people. So not just the sculptors that put this work together, but the people that do the fundraising, the actual artists that get involved, technology specialists, people that do marketing. So all of these people radically collaborate to bring together the work of the Flux Foundation. So I start with this image because it's the image on the cover of my book, which Angela asked me to remind you is available outside. And it's called Participatory Creativity, Introducing Access and Equity to the Creative Classroom. And there's a bunch of themes that come out of this book, but radical collaboration is at the heart of it, but so is this idea of radical inclusion. How can we include the most people in creativity? How can young people, regardless of their abilities, their strengths, be participants in the creative process? And I think this really connects nicely to some of the work that Temple Brandon just shared with us. So how do we really include the most amount of people in the creative process? So the book's outside and it's in English, but it's also available in Spanish, but without the cool picture. So I don't believe they have it outside, but you can certainly find it on Amazon or other places. La creatividad como proceso participativo y distribuido. Okay, I didn't translate it, but certainly available for you all in Spanish if you're interested in that work. So let's jump in and get started. So this is a little bit about what we're going to be doing for the next hour together. I'm going to talk you through a new framework for creativity that I hope will push our thinking and surface a new way of understanding the process of invention and innovation. Then we're going to look at a view from the creative classroom. So I'm going to share some work that young people have done in a particular environment, really engaging in this process of creativity and telling the story of participatory creativity in action. And then the last thing we're going to do is to address some big questions and puzzles. So I've got some questions and puzzles that I bring with me but hopefully if we have time, we could hear some questions and puzzles from you all. Does that sound good? Okay, great. So before I start, there's something that I like to do, and I learned this from a colleague of mine who really was interested in words in the way that I am. But I wonder if anyone in the audience today knows the etymology of the word creativity. Its origins, its word roots. Creativity. Anybody know? Okay, that's all right, I know. So creativity comes from the Latin word creare, and it means to birth or beget. Let's think about that for a moment. Creare, to birth or beget. So this word has long-standing roots, but it's really new in the way that we use it today. In fact, it's so new, it wouldn't have appeared around just a few decades ago. So something that I like to do when I travel is to travel with my grandmother's dictionary. So this is her dictionary from 1938, and I encourage you to come up and check out Grandma's dictionary later. But when you turn to the page where creativity should be, you'll see the word creator, you'll see the word creation, you'll see the word creative, you'll see the word creationism, but you will not see the word creativity in a 1938 dictionary of the English language. So a very new word the way that we use it today, and we wouldn't have used it in the way that we do just 8 decades ago, 80 years ago, when Grandma would have been using that dictionary. But even further back in time than that, we definitely wouldn't use the word creativity in the way that we do today. We wouldn't use it to describe me as creative, we wouldn't say you're creative, and we wouldn't say our students are creative. Okay, let's remember that Latin origin of the word, creare, to birth or beget. So to say that someone was creative would be heretical, would be blasphemous. Because back in the day, there was only one person who was creative, and you didn't mess with him. Okay? So this is a new way that we're using this word to apply it to individuals, and we're going to explore that today. So I've been talking about definitions a bit, and definitions are interesting and they're useful, but they can sometimes be really theoretical and lack a concrete nature to them. So what I'd like to do is to start off our exploration is think about a time, so start with your experiences, is to think about a time when you've seen creativity in action. Okay, we're going to take about 45 seconds, just quietly think to ourselves, think of a time when you've seen creativity in action. Whatever that word means to you, think of when you've seen it happen. 45 seconds, quiet thought. As you're doing that, I'd like to add another prompt. What was creative about that experience? Why is it that thing that you're thinking of right now? Another 45 seconds. So once you've had a moment to think of a time when you've seen creativity in action, and thought about, well, what was creative about that experience? What I'd like you to do is pair up with a neighbor or the 2 or 3 people around you, and for the next 3 or 5 minutes, just share what you talked about. So what was creative about that experience, and what were you thinking about? Right, so about 3 or 5 minutes of pair share. Sure, where would you like me to? Okay, so just another minute. Just another minute. start to finish up your last thought. Let's come together. Okay, 1-inch harmonica, everyone should have one. So you've spent some time talking about a moment when you've seen creativity in action. You've been discussing what about that experience was creative. So if you could see it in action, you could tell us what does it look like. So Angela and Yvonne have some microphones. Just like to hear a couple of thoughts. So what did people talk about? Can we see some hands? There's a thought, there's someone in the back.
I can run.
Angela will be right there.
Optimize this.
So what were you discussing?
We were discussing that one of the activities could be cooking. You cook, you add new ingredients to a recipe, and you concentrate on a presentation of the recipe. You are like being creative, and creativity is taking place.
Excellent, great, thank you. So you're using an existing recipe, but then you're adding to that recipe by putting in new ingredients and everything. So really kind of hacking the recipe, making a change on something that already exists. Excellent, thank you very much. That's a really good thought. Others? Another thought? And then we'll do there and there. Go ahead.
Angela, you were talking about something sort of mundane, but the idea of putting sentences together is an act of creativity.
Absolutely. So putting sentences together is an act of creativity. Every word that comes out of our mouth, even though something like, I've done this presentation before, but I really don't know what I'm going to say next. And that's an act of creativity in some sort of way. And when we have conversation and dialogue with others, we're putting together or constructing meaning in some sort of way. But we are sort of like the recipe, using structures that exist to make new structures as we're speaking. Great, thank you. There was one up here.
We both talk about examples of our kids, in which they are not afraid and they think that they can construct anything, everything is possible. If there's a kite will fly. And so they start, and they also create new things, new functions that they have no limits.
Great, so having no limits and being fearless in some sort of way. Excellent. And we'll take the last one here and then we're going to move on.
So I've been working in Cambodia and started a brand new school. So
That's creative.
that team, so that was creative. We created, and so for me, it looked like we had to do it. It was never going to fail. And it was teamwork and the collaboration. And it was pivoting and finding new solutions all the time. So we're just at the end of the very first year of school. We actually did get students. When I first went there, it was a building site. So it's been incredibly creative, and there's teamwork and talent development and collaboration.
Excellent, thank you. That's a wonderful segue to what we'll talk about. But first, congratulations to you and your school in Cambodia. But certainly, teamwork, collaboration, people coming together to pursue a goal that they all have in one way. So that's a wonderful segue, and we're going to move on to pushing our thinking or surfacing this new understanding of what creativity might be. And the way that I'd like to start that is talking about my colleague, this is Vlad Glavno, and he's a creativity researcher in Geneva in Switzerland. And when he talks about creativity, when he kind of gives the broad history of creativity, he talks about 3 creativity narratives that we've seen in the past. So the first narrative that he talks about is this he narrative. So this narrative, and it's gendered on purpose, that there are kind of creative luminaries. There are great man theories of creativity, and they're very based in the work of men. So we have luminaries of creativity, this he narrative of creativity. It's something that these special people have, these gifted people have, but the rest of us, not so much. But then we move into talking about what Vlad calls the I narrative. So moving away from this great man theory of creativity, to creativity being something that each of us, every single one of us, can pursue in some sort of way. So some people talk about this as a shift from big C creativity to little c creativity or middle C creativity. But both of those approaches are still individually focused. They're about creativity that individuals pursue and execute in some sort of way. But what Vlad and many others talk about now is this we narrative around creativity, much like our colleague had just discussed in developing the school in Cambodia, and much like the radical collaboration that I talked about at the beginning, where I showed that image from the Flux Foundation. So creativity is something that we do together. It's not something that individuals pursue or possess on their own. So I know that we're at the International Conference on Thinking, and the way that thinking has often been discussed, it's sort of been this individual process. Thinking is something that happens within the skulls and the skin of people, both adults and young people. So thinking discussed as an individual capacity. But we also know that thinking can be a very distributed process. The idea of distributed cognition, that even though we make meaning on our own, we actually cannot make meaning without being part of a broader social network. We have nothing to build on otherwise. So how do we move our ideas about thinking from being individual processes to being more distributed processes? And I'd like to try to do the same thing about creativity. How do we think about creativity not as an individual-based process that happens within the skulls and skin of young people and adults, but a more socially distributed process? So I call this, well, my definition of creativity goes like this, and it's a little wordy, but we're going to figure it out over the next 45 minutes together. What I say is creativity is a distributed process of idea development that takes place over time and incorporates the contribution of a diverse network of actors, each of whom uniquely participate in the development of ideas in various ways. So we heard Temple talk, and we've heard Howard talk about how young people are intelligent or smart in different ways. They can participate in creativity in unique and different ways. If we're going to focus on ideas, we have to talk about, well, what is an idea? So I define an idea as an ever-evolving conceptual through line that is embodied through a succession of innovative products. So products can be concrete objects, or they can be utterances and speech acts that serve as the evolving artifacts of ideas. So an idea is something that wends its way in the world, and then we have different products, artifacts of that idea along the way, and different people contributing to that idea as it goes along. And this is what I call participatory creativity. So we're going to unpack that right now. And I'm going to start by reframing creativity as a participatory process. So here in the United States, like in many Western countries, we have a really fond affection for heroes. We love individuals and their achievements. So we love our heroes. We love our valedictorians, we love our medal-winning Olympic athletes, and we love our award-winning different actors and actresses. We have this narrative in our culture that achievement is based on individual accomplishment. Even when a sports team wins a national title, what's the first thing we do? Yes, look for the MVP. So we know it's a collaborative process, but we want to name the star. Who's the most valuable player? Who can we look up to and say, yeah, that's the guy, or that's the woman, that's the person. So we do that at moments of great accomplishment, but we also do that at tragic moments as well. We have this interest in heroes, but we also have this interest in scapegoats. So when there's a terrorist attack, who did it? Who's the mastermind of that terrorist attack? Who did it and how did they do it so we can prevent it in the future? We're looking for individuals. So our individual-based culture has us prompted to think in terms of individual achievement. And that is in terms of creativity as much as it is in other forms of achievement. But we know from the work of Project Zero in their collaborations with Reggio Emilia in Italy that much, if not all, of learning happens from the interactions of groups. And our old friend Lev Vygotsky has taught us that all learning is social. So if all learning is social, maybe all creativity is social too. So there's a lot of research to support this. Here's some books up here on the screen from some of my colleagues. The first one is called Swarm Creativity, The Power of Collaborative Innovation Networks by Peter Glor, who's down the street from us up in Cambridge at MIT. The book in the middle is called Brute Genius by Keith Sawyer, a very prolific creativity researcher. And then the book over here is by my colleague Vlad Glavino, who I've already introduced to you. And he's talking about distributed creativity, thinking outside the box of the creative individual. So there's a lot of theory and academic work to support this idea of a distributed or more participatory approach to creativity, but we still have these connections to creative individuals. Sort of like this guy. So this is Albert Einstein, and it's hard to draw ourselves away from the myths of the genius of Albert Einstein. It's hard to see beyond his creative capacities and understand that creativity is a really distributed process. But if we think about research for a moment, one of the ways that researchers have explored creativity is to tell the biographies of supposedly creative individuals. So telling the biography of Albert Einstein to really find out, what was it that made him tick? What were his experiences like as a kid and as a young person growing up? And how can we replicate those experiences for other people? But what we find from telling the biographies of creative individuals is that their backgrounds and their histories are just as diverse as the inventions and ideas that they are known for. So I still like the idea of making biographies, of telling stories, but my interest is not telling the biographies of supposedly creative individuals, but telling the biographies of ideas. So what if instead of telling the biographies of creative individuals, like Albert Einstein, we told the biographies or the stories, the histories of the ideas those people are most known for? So in terms of Albert Einstein, what if we told the biography of the special theory of relativity? So if we told that story, we'd see that many people contribute to the biography of that idea. That Einstein was building off of work that originally started with Galileo and Newton about mechanics and absolute space and absolute time, but then drawing on the work of Michael Faraday and James Maxwell, who were interested in bringing physics and math to this and electromagnetism, and they rejected Newton's theory of absolute space and time. It was Maxwell that first said that space and time is not fixed, it is relative. And from that, Einstein built his special theory of relativity. But it's not just these historical actors. When Einstein was doing his work on the special theory of relativity, he regularly met with a group of artists and philosophers and scientists called the Olympiads. And they would have kind of like a physics version of book club. They would just kind of hang out and talk about big ideas. And Einstein was also married to a physicist, Maliva Merrick, who also contributed to his ideas. And his 1905 paper on the special theory of relativity was dedicated to Michel Bessel, one of his friends who he said broadly and widely contributed to the development of the special theory of relativity. So we have this myth about Einstein as this creative genius, but he was really scaffolded by so many other people. He could have never come up with the special theory of relativity without that network of actors that supported his work. But that's an older story to tell, and I want to just briefly tell a much more contemporary story. So this is a building in the Bronx in New York. This is a housing complex. Its address is 1520 Sedgwick Avenue in the Bronx. On August 11th, 1973, does anyone know what happened at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue? Anybody? Okay, I do. So on August 11th in 1973, at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue in this housing complex in the Bronx, this guy, whose name is Clive Campbell, he was a Jamaican immigrant to the United States, he threw a party with his sister Cindy Campbell. So it was, August, and school year was about to start, and Cindy decided she needed a new wardrobe. So she went to her brother Clive, and she said, "Hey Clive, let's throw a party, we'll charge everybody $2, and then I'll go to Macy's and get new clothes." So they thought this was a great idea. So Clive had borrowed a sound system, a PA system from his dad, who worked in the technology industry. And they also had a record player that they used. So he set up this record player. He took a bunch of his parents' LPs and everything. They put posters all around their neighborhood, and all these people came for this party. And it's supposed to be the first hip-hop event. So the birth of hip-hop happened on August 11th, 1973, in 1520 Sedgwick Avenue in the Bronx, but it really draws on all this different history. So Clive's experience as a young person, listening to reggae and dub music in Jamaica, where he was from, but also his parents' record collection. He just used what he had, and he was playing dance hall music and funk music and James Brown and everything. So just kind of mixing these different things on this record player. And people started dancing and everything, and the party was a great success. Cindy got really good clothes, and they had more parties like this. And then this phenomenon of having DJs throw these parties where people could dance became really popular. And what Clive started to notice was there was a certain part of a song that people really danced a lot to, and that was called the break. So this moment in a song when the kind of one section fades out and the rhythm really kicks in. So he saw people dance to the break, so he got 2 turntables, and he would get the same record, and he would play the break on one record, and then when it ended, he'd play it on the other, and then he'd play it on the other. He called this merry-go-round. And while he was, playing the break over and over, people were dancing. They were break dancing. And that's what the term break dancing comes from. So this is stuff that Clive and Cindy were doing in the 70s in the Bronx, but there are other people doing the same thing at the same time. So this is a guy named Africa Bambaataa. And Africa Bambaataa was also a DJ, but he had a much different background. So he lived in a household where his parents were black nationalists and black Muslims, and they talked about spirituality and resistance and coming together in some sort of way. And they had a much different record collection, and that's all he had to work with. So he was playing all sorts of things when he would DJ. But Africa Bambaataa has a really interesting history. In the Bronx, in the 70s, he was what was called a warlord for one of the biggest gangs in the city, the Black Spades. And he would, regularly engage in violence with this group of young people as they fought over turf in different neighborhoods. But then he had this turn, and he said, we got to stop fighting and come together in some sort of way. So he developed an organization called the Bronx River Organization, which was later called the Zulu Nation, which was about coming together and being a family. It was the first hip-hop organization. And Africa Bambaataa identified 4 different elements of hip-hop. DJing, so turntabling, MCing, or what we might call rapping, and then b-boying, or b-girl, and that means breakdancing in some sort of way, and then graffiti. So not only does hip-hop have this extended history, it also has these different ways to participate in it as a movement. And there's a through line of this cultural movement that runs through it. Another guy who was doing this work at that time was this guy. So this is Joseph Sadler, and he didn't have nearly the record collection that these other guys did, but what he was really interested in was tinkering. Brandon talked to us about tinkering. So he would be taking apart different stereo systems and everything, and he was developing faders and all sorts of stuff, trying to make DJing a science. And he later became known as Grandmaster Flash. And he had these really flashy approaches to DJing that were very technical in some sort of way. And he would work with a bunch of MCs called the Furious Five. So Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five brought this panache and this showmanship to hip-hop in some sort of way. So really pushed the needle on what hip-hop was. So we start with this kind of origin story of these 4 or 5 different people, but we know that the work of hip-hop has gone on and on and on over the decades, includes many different actors who have contributed to hip-hop in many different ways. So it's a way to tell the biography of hip-hop as an idea. And this is DJ Kool Herc more recently at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue, and he's saying that hip-hop is a family, so everyone has got to pitch in some sort of way. Beyond having this hero version of what hip-hop is, having this family idea of what hip-hop is. But there's this core through line, this central element of the idea of hip-hop. I want to jump around in time, jump around in history for a little bit, and talk about this image for a second. So this is an image from World War II, and you'll recall earlier that I said Grandma's Notebook from 1938 didn't have the word creativity in it. But after World War II, we'll find that the dictionaries we have in our homes do have the word creativity in it. So what happened in World War II that launched us into thinking about creativity? Well, a couple things happened. We had the dawn of the cognitive revolution, we had Sputnik launch into space, and we had the beginning of the Cold War. So the concept of creativity all of a sudden became really important to us here in the United States. And one of the people that really pushed this idea was this guy. This is J.P. Guilford. And in 1950, J.P. Guilford was elected to be the president of the American Psychological Association. And at his inaugural address, he read a paper that he'd written called Creativity. So his urge to his colleagues was to study this concept of creativity. And he said, and I know this isn't so clear, but I'll read it here. This is an excerpt from his paper written in 1950, so 68 years ago. He said, "Why do we not produce a larger number of creative geniuses than we do under supposedly enlightened educational practices?" Sounds interesting. And the way he's framing creativity is around this idea of genius. So what Guilford is going to do, and he had previously worked for the US Navy, is try to find the creative potential in young people and then how to track those young people into positions that will help us develop our country, beat Russia, and maintain our national security. So this whole idea of creativity coming from this place of supporting our national interests in the United States and tracking kids into different professions and positions. So this idea gets picked up for a while, and this is a guy named E. Paul Torrance, and Torrance developed several different tests to study or measure creativity from a very specific way. Something else I like to travel with is a brick. TSA loves me. Do you have any idea why there's a brick on the screen and in my hand right now? Yeah. Building, that's a great idea. We're building ideas, we could say. That's one thing that we hear sometimes. Anyone else have another theory? Collaboration of materials, okay. This is actually the most popular creativity test. Name 50 uses for a brick. Okay, so when you take that creativity test, and that's just one of them, there are other variations. What might be the benefits of having an extra thumb on each hand? What the test takers or test makers are looking for are three things: frequency, fluency, and elaboration. So frequency, how many different ideas do you come up with? Fluency, how broad or different are those ideas from one another? And elaboration, how do you expand on or elaborate on your ideas? So when you think about it, creativity tests from this perspective have right or wrong answers. And I find that to be really problematic. So from my perspective, I think that individual approaches to creativity and the tests that are designed to measure creativity are actually harmful to young people. And I'll explain why. And I think they're harmful to young people in 5 different ways that I call the 5 crises of creativity stemming from our culture of individualism. So that individualism that I talked about earlier. So the first crisis is that some kids are more creative than others misconception. So if there's only one way to be creative, and there's a test that measures that, well then some kids do better than others on that test. And that sets us up as educators and administrators to say that some kids are more creative than others. Or worse, some kids are creative and other kids are not. The other crisis that I talk about is the "I'm just not a creative person" syndrome. We've all heard this from people in our lives in some sort of way. Sadly, we've probably heard it from young people, too. If there's one way to be creative, and you don't test well on that test, well then, of course you're going to have this sense of, "I'm just not a creative person. The test tells me I'm not." So how do we get out of that fixed mindset and have a more of a growth mindset around creativity by expanding what creativity is and means and how to participate in it? And then the third crisis is narrowly defining creativity privileges some students and alienates others. So once we define what creativity is and how to participate in it, well then the kids that have those capacities are privileged over the kids that have different capacities. How to get away from that? And a fourth crisis is denying young people the opportunity to invent and learn with others. So we learned from the work of Reggio Emilia in Italy that young people create ideas and create knowledge together, and we shouldn't think of creativity as individual achievement, but rather collective engagement. And then the last crisis here from our culture of individualism is that we're ill-equipping young people for life and work in the contemporary world. We don't look for creative geniuses anymore. We look for young people and adults to participate in diverse networks of approaching really complex problems. So these are the 5 crises of creativity stemming from our culture of individualism. But I also talk about the 3 crises of creativity stemming from our cultures of power. So what I do, I like to share images of the people that I'm talking about, not just reference theorists. And you'll notice that other than my images from the hip hop section, I've showed a lot of pictures of white guys. And when you think about it, the dominant narrative in creativity theory has largely been a conversation amongst white people. So how do we get away from that dominant culture of power and introduce new voices into this creativity conversation? So one of the crises of creativity stemming from our cultures of power that I talk about is that we're assuming that creativity in education is some way socially and culturally neutral. So if creativity comes from a certain culture, then the ideas and the interests of that culture are charged within that work. So as creativity comes from a culture of power, and that theory is developed into pedagogy, and that pedagogy is used in our classrooms, well then we can't say that creativity is socially and culturally neutral. It's socially and culturally charged. The other crisis from our culture of power is there's a misalignment in identity and the representation of creative icons. So the pictures of Albert Einstein, the pictures of Steve Jobs, the pictures of other dead white guys that we see in our classrooms with pithy quotes under them saying, creativity, you can do it. Well, creativity literally doesn't look like the majority of, that image of creativity literally doesn't look like the majority of our students. And the last one is there's an imbalance of opportunity in who has access to creativity within education. And it's usually something that's way more accessible for the more privileged young people and adults amongst us. So putting these together, 5 plus 3 equals what I call the 8 barriers to access and equity in the creative classroom. How do we get beyond this? How do we get beyond this individual notion of what creativity is in some sort of way? Well, actually, participatory approaches to creativity are all around us. Now, those of us familiar with design thinking know that a core tenet of that work is to bring people from multiple perspectives together to solve complex challenges. Those of us familiar with the maker movement know that the whole idea is if you're not sharing or working with others, you're doing it wrong, and it's all about bringing people from different perspectives together. An example of that is when young people are working online or interacting with other people. They're not working alone, they're working with other people. And a specific example of that, when young people are downloading video content from YouTube, changing it, hacking it, re-uploading it, liking it, adding comments and everything, they're participating in creativity with others. Another specific example is using coding platforms like Scratch, where young people are prompted to download information from others, hack it, and put it back out in the world. And then also gaming. Young people are not just participating in games on their own, they're creating narratives and plot lines and characters, not by themselves, with other people. And of course, social media is called social for a reason. It's about people coming together to develop and share ideas. And they do that through using hashtags, where people develop meaning together, or they contribute to creativity by adding to a meme or a hashtag in some way. And that might be Black Lives Matter, or If They Gun Me Down, or any other different type of hashtag where people are contributing to creativity together. So participatory creativity is all around us, but yet we have this individual focus on creativity. So I said earlier, we need to get away from thinking about creativity as being within the skulls and skin of people. So my proposition for how we do that is to move the locus of creativity, move where it lives, take it outside of here, put it here. And to do that, I suggest that we not think of individuals as being creative, but instead think of ideas as being creative. So if we stop thinking about individuals as being creative, and instead think of ideas as being creative, then there's multiple ways for a variety of individuals to participate in the development of creative ideas in the unique ways that build on their talents, their expertise, and their personal backgrounds and stories. So, I want to offer a quick view from the creative classroom to show what this participatory approach to creativity might look like in action. To do that, I'm going to tell you a story, And it comes from an organization up by me called the Art Science Prize, the Boston Art Science Prize. And at the Boston Art Science Prize, young people from public high schools in Boston come together to work in teams to pursue challenges around specific design concepts. So around different ideas or theories in some sort of way. And they're prompted to bring together the arts and the sciences. So the story that I'm going to tell is called Biodegradable. So I know you can't read everything perfectly up there, so I'll just talk it. Oh, it's actually better than I thought. Okay, so this is a story about 3 young men. Their names are Billy, Danny, and Hamza. And they're coming together at the Boston Art Science Prize during a year where the organization is really focused on a concept that they're calling the future of water. So what might the future of water be in some sort of way? And how can we develop ideas in that regard? So they're working with 2 adult mentors. Their names are Ethan and Jen. And Ethan is a scientist. He's really thinking about different scientific things. He's kind of prompting the boys thinking by, saying, well, how can we develop vessels that are natural and carry water in nature instead of using plastic or other things? And he's referencing things like coconuts that are natural vessels that carry water in some sort of way. So they're like, okay, that's interesting. And Jen is talking about rainbows and how does light refract within rainbows and how can we build on that kind of concept in some sort of way? But the boys really aren't biting either of those ideas. They're interested in the seed idea, so an idea that the organization has given them to prompt their thinking as well, and it's called the water maker. How to bring water to people in need. And it specifically connects to this experience that Danny has had on the Boston Harbor, where he was out on a boat tour, and then the boat broke down, and they were surrounded by water, but they didn't have any potable water. They didn't have any water to drink. So he's like, yeah, I could have really used something like this at that time. So they continue brainstorming, and Hamza's thinking about how do we make artificial water that we could use in fountains so they're not so wasteful. Danny's still thinking about that whole idea of bringing water to people in need. And Billy, he's thinking a little differently. He's like, well, how can we use nanotechnology to make personal grooming products? Okay, we have all these different ideas, but then they settle on this idea of bringing water to people in need. So they're really going to try to figure this out. They're thinking, this can help hikers who get lost in the woods, this can help in disaster situations, or in Danny's original experience, being stuck out at sea. So they decide that they're going to use condensation in some sort of way. And they call their idea the condensator. And they spell it with a K, because it sounds German, and that sounds cool. So the condensator, they're going to try to figure out how to make this thing. But then when they search on the internet, they find all these different precedents for their idea. There's this mesh screen in Haiti that captures moisture from the air and produces potable water. There's this military device that's been developed in the United States to help troops in the desert. So they're like getting really frustrated by this. They're saying, they totally stole their idea. And then Ethan's like, how could they have stolen your idea if they patented it like 6 years ago? And the boys don't want to hear that. They're just like, no, they're just frustrated. And then Ethan and Jen are like, guys, don't worry about it. You just have to think about something more innovative. So they try to do that, and Ethan takes out a comb and he rubs it on his trousers and he holds it up to a faucet and shows that you can bend water with the electrons that are coming off of a statically charged comb. And then Jen is talking about fabrics and textiles and polarity and how we can relate that to water. But the boys really aren't interested. Nothing's catching. They're kind of stuck. And then one night, Ethan is home and he's watching an American program that some of you will be familiar with. He's watching Mythbusters, right? So on this program of Mythbusters, where they try out different scientific ideas to see if they're sound, they're doing an episode on something called pykrete. So pykrete was a substance developed by a scientist in Canada, again during World War II, and it's a combination of sawdust and water, which when frozen together is supposed to be stronger than concrete. He called it pykrete because his name was Jeffrey Pike, so it's a combination of his last name and concrete. So pykrete, a substance that when frozen is supposed to be stronger than concrete, and it's supposed to be bulletproof too. So what Jeffrey Pike wanted to do with this was to build aircraft carriers for the military. So it was stronger than concrete, it was bulletproof, but it also melted too. So that was a little problem for his idea about building aircraft carriers. But anyway, Ethan takes the idea to the boys. He says, hey guys, watching Mythbusters the other night, there's this whole idea of pykrete and it's a substance, we can make it here in the lab and it's bulletproof. They're like, did you say bulletproof? That's so cool. So then all of a sudden what they want to do is just make anything out of pykrete, whatever they can do. So they start experimenting with this substance, making it in their lab, and trying out different things. And it's a snowy winter in Boston, as happens for us. And Jen's saying, well, maybe you can make pykrete steps that go over the snowbanks so that people can get over them. So basically what the boys did then was just freeze a bunch of telephone books, and that really didn't work out so well. So they're like, we got to try something else. And they're outside one day and they're shoveling, and somebody's like, hey, maybe we can make pykrete snow shovels. That way in the spring when it gets warmer, you don't have to store them anymore. They just melt and go away. I'm like, okay, that's a good idea. But then one of them says, you know what? It would be too hard to mold them. You know why they really didn't make the aircraft carriers? It would be too hard to mold them. So they let go of that idea, and they're shoveling in the snow and everything, and then all of a sudden somebody says, what if we made pykrete golf balls? And they're like, golf balls? And they're like, yeah, and none of these guys play golf, but they have this illusion of people playing golf and losing their golf balls, and they're like, yeah, if you lost your golf ball, it would just melt and water the golf course. You don't have to feel bad about it. So like, oh, that's a cool idea. We'll make pykrete golf balls. But then when they were playing around with this, they noticed that, when these things melted, they also left this residue of whatever the binding agent was there. So they said, oh, well, what if we, and that kind of littered or polluted the golf course. So then they said, what if we use biodegradable materials to hold the golf ball together? And they liked this idea. And they called it biodegradable. So they went and pursued this idea of developing biodegradable pykrete golf balls. So they experimented and they tested their idea, they shared it with others and presented in front of people and got feedback. They went down to the Charles River and knocked a bunch of golf balls in the river to see how they performed. They even tested them out with local flora and fauna to see how they responded to them. And then the boys, they kind of end with this idea. They want to make these biodegradable golf balls that you can hit off of the back of the cruise ship in some sort of way. So you can just kind of hit golf balls into the ocean and not feel bad because they're going to melt in some sort of way. This whole idea of developing biodegradable golf ball. Here are the boys working with Ethan and Jen, and they're using liquid nitrogen there to freeze their experiments in some sort of way. And then here are some of their prototypes that they use. So this is an actual golf ball. That one's like newspaper. That's just a ball of ice. This one's kiwi, and I know that that's Doritos. So they're just trying different things out. So these are some of their experiments. Making these biodegradable golf balls. And the story kind of ends there because they don't really market these or something like that. The program ends and the boys go their separate way. But all that being said, biodegradable, right? Think of this story. Whose idea was it? Where did the idea come from? Well, you can't say it was the boy's idea because Ethan watched the program about pykrete, but you can't say it was his idea because he didn't make pykrete, and so we can trace all these things back, but we can't focus on a single actor who developed this idea because creativity isn't an individual capacity, it's a distributed process. So what does this suggest? That there's no one way to be creative, but rather multiple ways to participate in creativity in some way. So, that's the big idea. I just want to talk about some big questions and puzzles that I've heard from other people over time, and maybe you're holding on to one of these questions and puzzles right now. So people say, oh, okay, Edward, this is great, I get this participatory creativity stuff. Well, what about the types of creativity that happen when young people are working alone? What about the more introverted students who don't thrive in group learning environments? So some responses that I've offered this is to kind of cite some of that literature that I shared earlier. So Keith Sawyer says that even when we appear to be inventing on our own, our actions are always drawing upon our past collaborations. We haven't been raised, or we don't exist in isolation. We've been raised in culture. And even when it looks like we're working by ourselves, or even when it looks like our young people are working by themselves, they're always drawing upon their past interactions with others. They're collaborating, even though there aren't other people in the room with them collaborating with. And then also, Glavino has said that artists and inventors who appear to be working by themselves always use the tools and technologies developed by others. So if we go back to that example earlier of the recipe, that's building upon something that others had. Or go back to the example of language that was shared. That's building upon tools and technologies that others have had. But if we think about the artist studio, the brushes, the paints, the canvas, whatever it is the artists are working with, it's likely the artist didn't invent those things, but rather is pulling on traditions that other people have brought with them. So one way I like to exemplify this is to talk about, creativity is always socially and culturally situated. And one way I like to talk about this is to talk about one more dead white guy. So this is Kurt Cobain, and he was the leader of the band Nirvana, the grunge rock band, in the 1990s. And when Kurt Cobain died at the age of 27, he was arguably one of the biggest rock stars in the world. But what I like to say is that Kurt Cobain, born on a desert island, does not write the song he's most known for, Smells Like Teen Spirit. Okay? Kurt Cobain, or if any of us were born on a desert island and didn't have interaction with culture, wouldn't be able to be creative in any sort of way. And the Kurt Cobain example was he was raised and brought up and supported by a whole network of people that we don't see, who have faded into history. We just have that one hero figure that brought us grunge rock in the 1990s. Lots of flannel. So, 4 key points. No feat of excellence occurs in isolation. Creativity is always distributed amongst many individuals. When we shift the focal point of creativity from individuals to ideas, we provide the opportunity for all students to participate in the development of creative ideas. And then telling the story of creative idea development allows us to see how innovative ideas emerge and how various individuals contribute to creative idea generation along the way. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, students play various roles when they participate in creativity, but those roles are neither fixed nor unidimensional. So those roles are always dynamic, changing, and we have to be sure not to pigeonhole young people into certain creative roles in some sort of way. So these are the big ideas that I'm presenting here today. This is the shift in thinking about creativity that I'd like to present. And the crux of it is that young people, adults, no one is creative. Kids aren't creative, adults aren't creative, Albert Einstein isn't creative, ideas are creative. And if we can hold on to that, then we can see that there's many ways that our young people and ourselves participate in creativity in some sort of way. So I hope this idea has got some traction for you. But I know that as soon as you go out that door, the tractor beams of our individualist culture will bring you back, and these ideas might start to fade. And when they do, I want you to think of a V of geese. Okay? So it might look like there's a lead goose and a bunch of followers, but we know it really doesn't work like that. It's more of an organic process where the geese take turns and play different roles as they participate in making this V of geese in the sky to wherever they're headed. And there's, if we think about it, there's not a lead goose who's on the ground and he's like, hey guys, let's do that V thing. It just doesn't work like that. It happens more organically. But we as a species are much more interesting than geese. And when we think of more participatory framings of creativity, then we learn from one another, we solve problems together, we surprise ourselves, and we experience joy. So thank you, everybody. That's my show. And Thank you. So the timer tells me we have